who's taken their own life, or a young African man who's died on the grueling journey to Europe.
There's so many tombstones in European cemeteries with, written in Italian, it's sconosciuto. Unknown, with the date of death, and that's it. I think this is tragic. Nobody was trying to identify these people, and they were sort of like left behind and forgotten. I think this is the ultimate insult that someone can receive. It's infringing the dignity and the right of the dead, but it's tragic because it's a violation of the rights of people who are looking for that body.
An estimated near 20,000 migrants have disappeared in the Mediterranean Sea since 2014, and that's just the doomed boats we know about. So many families ignorant of the fate of a loved one, including those still wanting news from the tragedy of the night of the 18th of April 2015.
I wasn't in the village at the time, but someone called my father from Libya and told him people had drowned. So it was my father who informed me.
Demba is from southern Mauritania. The family suspect two of his older brothers, a cousin and one of their neighbours, were all on the blue fishing boat.
Until today, my mother and father are devastated. The same goes for my cousin's mother, who lost her only child. This has had a big impact on family morale. According to my dad, it broke them.
What difference would it make to your family if there was confirmation that your brothers and your cousin and the neighbour were definitely on that boat?
There's a big difference between seeing the deceased and not seeing them. If the parents saw the bodies, it might help them overcome the ordeal.
So nearly 6 years after the tragedy, Demba's family exist in suspended reality. They want some kind of proof. Doctors have given this state of not knowing if a loved one is alive or dead a technical term. It's called ambiguous loss.
Neurologists now have come to prove how this leads to, psychiatric disease, psychological disease, depression, alcoholism. I think if you can have the certainty that your loved one is dead, then you can start grieving. And so identifying the dead has to be done, not only to solve criminal cases or for respect for the dignity of the dead, but it's something that, first of all, has to do with the health of the living who are behind that dead person.
So what do we know about what happened in international waters mid-Mediterranean on the 18th of April 2015? In the early evening, the driver of the blue fishing boat put out a distress call. The European Union had pulled back on its search and rescue operations, so a merchant vessel was the first on the scene around 11 p.m. It was a moonless night. The King Jacob, a container ship, switched on its lights. The shape of the small fishing boat was completely obscured by the hundreds of people on board. The master of the King Jacob turned off its engines to commence rescue, and the overladen fishing boat attempted to pull up alongside. Suddenly, its driver accelerated.
Our boat collided with a large ship head-on. We hit the ship more than once.
Abdurrazak, a Somali who's now 25, was one of the survivors.
We passed the front of the ship, then we scraped along the side. After that, we couldn't stay afloat and our boat capsized.
Abdurrazak found himself under the boat and under the water.
My clothes were ripped off because people were holding on to me. I tried to free myself and swim to the surface. It took a few minutes.
And then when you got to the surface of the water, what could you see around you?
I could hear a lot of shouting and screaming. People were still trying to hold on to me. So I swam away from the crowd. I was so tired, and I still had so much water inside me. I tried to swim after the big ship. I was about to give up when they threw down a life support.
Utterly exhausted, Abdurrazak managed to climb the ladder up the steep sides of the King Jacob, one of only 28 survivors. Around 1,000 people drowned. Nearly 6 years ago, the loss of this many refugees and migrants still had the power to shock. there was an emergency meeting of the European Union.
Noi non siamo nelle condizioni di verificare o confermare i numeri.
Italy's Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi, was visibly shaken as he addressed a press conference. We're not in a position to verify the numbers, but in any case, I don't want to talk about statistics, he said. We're talking about human lives. In 2015, migration will become Europe's biggest talking point, and Matteo Renzi determined to keep the tragedy of the 18th of April in the minds of his EU partners. In the months that followed, the Italian authorities didn't forget the shipwreck. They assembled a task force.
There were 249 bodies collected around the boat, and we worked on these bodies until 1 year after, when our Prime Minister at the time decided to pull the boat up. And
so this was a huge operation to bring that boat up from the seafloor,
exactly.
Right?
Well, obviously, not everyone agreed, but at that time the majority agreed that this was what had to be done.
The boat sank just over 100 kilometres from Libya. Robots roamed the Mediterranean seabed looking for the vessel, and after a month of exploration, it was located, resting on its keel at a depth of 370 metres. In memory of those who died, Italian Navy divers placed a large wreath on the boat. A specially made cradle was built to surround it, then struts secured the boat to the cradle, and in an operation that was postponed due to technical challenges and adverse weather conditions, finally, on June the 27th, 2016, the wreck was lifted and broke the surface of a glassy Mediterranean Sea.
Perfetto, ottimo lavoro. Andiamo avanti, grazie.
This complex feat of engineering cost €9.5 million. The boat was taken to the naval base of Melilli on the island of Sicily, where an army of volunteer fire officers and forensic pathologists were waiting.
I saw the boat while it was arriving, and it looked so small, and it had 2 huge holes on the sides, which the Navy had covered with a black sheet in order not to, allow anything to fall out. And the holes were due to the recovery. And this image of the mythological ships coming back with black drapes in the Greek mythology when there was bad news just came to mind. It was a very strong moment.
The Italian fire brigade got to work sawing into the hull to reach the bodies inside. In protective clothing, 348 volunteer fire officers from the length and breadth of Italy worked over 12 days taking out the human remains. And a warning, you're about to hear some of the detail of that operation. Roberto Di Bartolo was in charge.
Quando abbiamo aperto la prima breccia,
when we opened the first access point, the impression was it was comparable to what it must be like to be in hell. A hell where all those people who'd left home with hope had lost it during the shipwreck and while they were dying.
Just imagine a sea, a floor which is covered with bodies, and they remind us of bodies, but obviously they had no more face. They were just, they looked like dressed dummies.
It was deeply upsetting work, and the conditions were brutal, with temperatures reaching 40 degrees in the Sicilian summer. The fire officers worked in 20-minute shifts and were debriefed by psychologists in the evenings. In parts of the boat, there was little that resembled any person.
Ci siamo dovuti inventare.
We had to invent new ways of recovering the material. Where the bodies had become liquid, we had to use pumps. And where they were more intact, we used different tools depending on their solidity. Sometimes we worked lying down to avoid stepping on the bodies. In the hold, much of our work was done this way.
While Roberto Di Bartolo and his officers continued their grisly task, Dr. Catania and a team of pathologists worked on the autopsies.
These individuals had all their documents sewn in their clothes. ID, letters, love letters, There was a report card of a 14-year-old. And so what you think of automatically is what was in the mind of this 14-year-old or of the mother who sewed, the report card in the lining of the jacket.
Cristina e Paolo che stanno cercando di capire.
The ancient town of Syracuse on Sicily's east coast is Roberto Di Bartolo's home. When we meet, we sit on a wooden bench by the sea, looking at his photos from the operation. He's retired from the fire service, but that summer working with Dr. Cristina Cattaneo has stayed with him. Some things are just unforgettable. Roberto closes his laptop and says this.
Questa nave non aveva ancore.
The boat didn't have an anchor. The space where the anchor chains are usually stored, this was occupied by people. We've recovered dozens of bodies from this space. So it was a boat that started its journey without anchors. A boat that started its journey without the expectation of arrival.
Did the traffickers know they were sending migrants into the abyss? A more generous interpretation might be that they assumed the people on the blue fishing boat would be rescued before they reached Italy. A lot of people listening to you, Roberto, might think, well, this is a very expensive operation to raise this boat, do all of the work that you did and now the work that Dr. Cattaneo is doing. And perhaps it's better to leave migrants in a watery grave. I mean, what would you say to those people?
Penso che se la risposta è facile, basta pensare.
I think the answer's easy. What if these people had been from Europe, passengers on a luxury cruiser or an airplane, and not from Africa? We wouldn't even discuss this question. So then we're admitting issues of life and death depend on your origins or the colour of your skin.
By the end of their mission, the fire officers had filled 458 body bags. And then there's what's called commingled remains, residues of people mixed one with many others. These gave Cristina Cattaneo a recurring dream.
I was on a road with pebbles, loads of, gravel and pebbles, and I was looking for tiny bones. At every corner, I would think I saw a bone, and then it was a pebble. So it went on and on like that, and I think because we were all a bit stressed by, not leaving anything behind.
Dr. Cattaneo's preoccupation is rooted in her mission to eventually be able to name all those people.
The obsession derives from the fact that what remains from one of these individuals could be represented only by that phalanx, which is a very small bone, and that means that that bone could be the only bone that remains of a person who was on that boat, and therefore could be the only way to identification, which is quite stressful.
After the operation ended in Sicily in 2016, human matter was transported to Dr. Cattaneo's labs in Milan, where she and her team have been working to extract DNA.
We have the profiles of about 150 of the bodies, but that's where we stop because, and now especially in the past year, we haven't found no more funding. In the meantime, however, in parallel, as we've said, you have to look for the relatives.
And this is where the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, has picked up the baton. Traditionally, families approach the ICRC if they have a missing loved one, but that's changing.
We don't need only to wait for people to come to us asking to search for somebody, but to also go to them to find out where they're searching for somebody and associate the information of these individual cases to try to understand how these groups look like.
Dr. Jose Pablo Barrebar, a veteran of forensic investigations and missing person inquiries in Srebrenica, Rwanda and his native Peru, is the forensic coordinator of the ICRC.
You will always find somebody that saw something, somebody that was actually in the same event and this person has survived, for example, and that information is extremely useful to try to create, in this specific case, some sort of passengers list.
And how far have you got with that passenger list?
We have a few hundred names, certainly we do. It is a painfully slow process.
Dr. Barrebar has been on field trips to collect information related to those who perished on the Blue Boat. In Senegal, Ibrahima Senghor, now back home and scratching a living after failing to board the boat in Libya, has been one of his sources.
From Kochari, my village, there were 3 people I knew. We were friends. One was my apprentice. We left home together. We spent a week in the desert and stayed together until the moment we arrived at the beach in Libya. And then, because of the large number of people, we were separated. My friends were all lost at sea. I gave the Red Cross the addresses of their families.
In Mauritania, Demba, who thinks he lost 2 brothers, a cousin and a neighbour in the wreck, met Dr. Barry Barr and the Red Cross mission too.
They told us they had found the boat. The Red Cross took our DNA and they asked questions about the family members we had lost. They also visited another village close by.
Making contact with families in their home countries is challenging. Dr. Catania thinks much more could be done in Europe.
We're talking about one disaster, but we have at least 30,000 dead on our shores, in our cemeteries, in the past 15, 20 years. But anyways, many of the relatives of these people are living in Europe. Imagine having single offices, which could be governmental offices, trying to collect information on the bodies.
So those would be centres where the families of missing people could come, and not just the families of migrants, to give information about a lost loved one.
And imagine creating a network between all these offices. It's quite simple with the technology we have. In other words, you could compare the post-mortem information with the ante-mortem information.
That means comparing pathologist data, things like DNA and dental information, with material provided by friends and family of the missing person. Ideally, that would be DNA too, but it could also be X-rays, personal belongings, photos and descriptions.
Food is part of our everyday experience, so because of that, food is the sort of perfect vehicle to have these superstitions. It's so linked to our identity and our being that we've evolved a very complex relationship with it.
We humans have been connecting food and magic for thousands of years. In this episode of The Food Chain from the BBC World Service, 3 guests from very different parts of the world are going to help us explore some of the traditions this connection has spawned. We'll ask why many of them persist and what they say about our world and ourselves. I'm Tamsin Ford.
You know, the ash god or the pumpkin, the white pumpkin, that's always considered to be something that attracts the evil eye.
This is Jonty Rajgopalan, a food historian and food tour guide in Hyderabad in India.
So whenever you got into a new house, they take the ash god and paint a face on it, which looks a little scary. And then you go to every corner of the house and then you attract all the evil spirits, and then you go and smash it on the threshold. So it's like almost like murdered ash god at your threshold, which is not a very good sight for a new house.
Is that something you've ever done?
I did it. I had to do it. I mean, when I moved into my new house, I had to do it. And you're just like, okay, I'm going to do it. And
Pumpkins have been connected to evil spirits for centuries. The jack-o'-lanterns, a Celtic pagan tradition, began with turnips. The Irish would carve scary faces in them to repel evil spirits on All Hallows Eve, what's now known as Halloween. When they emigrated to North America in the 19th century, they began to use pumpkins instead. But the fruit holds a lot of power in West Africa too. Maya Zango is a journalist in Monrovia, the capital of Liberia.
I can remember it was a few years back. I was going to east of Liberia to see my sister. So while we were on our way, we saw some nice looking pumpkin and we bought the pumpkin. But then the driver told us that we should put a mark on the pumpkin or else the car will break down or the tire will get flat. And we told him we don't believe in those things, and we didn't mind. We just put the pumpkin in the back of the car. We got about 30 or 45 minutes. The car stopped and the car wouldn't start. He said, I told you people to mark this pumpkin. This is why the car broke down. And I was like, wow. Is it really true? He said, yes. So we took the pumpkin out of the car, asked the people in the town to give us a knife. After 3 minutes, he started the car started. He said, you see? So it's a belief. And when I went to Sierra Leone, the people in Sierra Leone told me the same thing.
So after that experience, if you would put a pumpkin in your car now, would you mark it before travelling?
Oh, yes. When I put pumpkin in my car, whenever I buy pumpkin, I always mark it. Every time. From that day onward. Yeah. I mean, almost all of the tribe in Liberia do it. I mean, it has been going down from generation to generation. They believe that pumpkin has a spiritual power.
Is this just a belief in magic? Is it tradition? Or maybe something more? What actually is a superstition?
So I think a superstition is quite close to a habit and quite close to a ritual. But I think the thing that makes a superstition and not a ritual or a habit is that it's not just a physical act, it's a mental action as well.
Tasha Marks is a European food historian and artist based in London, England.
Well, there's certain things like when you have superstitions and they sort of mix with science and health and medicine, and one of the examples of that would be something like garlic, which We all know garlic wards off vampires, but it's also been thought to ward off the evil eye. And if you come across the term the evil eye, it's a sort of blanket term that sort of applies to any bad luck. And that comes from many cultures, and it has loads of different cures to it. But why garlic? It's a bit of a weird one to sort of focus on, but garlic has been used in medicinal practices for centuries all across Europe, and it has these sort of healing properties to it. It was even used at one point to keep the plague at bay, though whether or not that actually worked, I think, has been greatly over-exaggerated with time. But yeah, it's just an example of one of those foodstuffs that really straddles this idea of magic and medicine together.
And even if some of these superstitions don't have any connection to science, Tasha says she can often see the logic behind them.
Well, one of them that I came across quite recently was about concerning eggs. And I think understandably they symbolise fertility, and we can all sort of see maybe the logic of that, the egg and the seed and what that represents. So farmers would scatter broken eggs onto their fields hoping they would bring forth an abundant crop. And my mother-in-law, for instance, still puts crushed eggshells into her plant pots. Whether that's superstitious or to add something to the soil, I don't really know. Also, if you break open an egg and you find 2 yolks in it, it's meant to symbolise that someone you know might be pregnant or having twins. Again, I can sort of see the logic there, but one of the weirder ones, which sort of starts around the 1500s, is that unless you crush the egg shell after you've cracked the eggs, that a witch will come and gather up the pieces and set sail, causing terrible storms at sea. That is definitely a weird one that I had not come across before.
Preventing bad luck or driving away the devil features a lot when it comes to food and superstition. And it's often the sour-tasting foods, like lemons, says Jonty Rajkapalan, that really ward off the evil spirits.
If you visited India, you will see on thresholds or in cars, most people believe that it avoids any kind of evil spirits, or the evil eye, gets averted because of this lemon chili. And then a slightly more religious, interpretation of this is that Goddess Lakshmi, she's the goddess of wealth, and she has a twin sister who brings about a lot of destruction. So she's the one who you don't want coming into your house, and she tends to prefer things which are sour and and chili spice. So she finds the lemon chili and she eats it and she retreats.
Food is adulated, revered, and even feared. The way we grow, eat, serve, and even travel with certain foods is said to have consequences. And when it comes to the dead, we use food to help them too.
Even the use of sesame seed, that's supposed to be the almost like the way to get your ancestors to go to the other world, kind of giving their soul some peace. And sesame seed is a part of most of these rituals because we constantly are helping our ancestors move to the other world so that their souls are set free from the earth. I don't do it, but my mom, she'll take a spoonful of whatever she's cooked that day, which is usually rice in our house, and she'll put whatever lentils on that little rice and put a little bit on the balcony, and a crow will come and eat it. And she believes that that's the ancestors coming and eating it. And a lot of people do this, especially in South India. It's just something that feeds my soul to believe that, okay, fine, my ancestors are eating something and, they're moving on to the next world, which is what I want them to do.
Rituals around rice, like the pumpkin, straddle cultures and countries across the world, especially those where rice is the staple food.
Yeah, I guess, the first thing that comes to my mind, especially in southern India, they take rice powder and make designs outside their house. They wash the outside of their house and make patterns on the ground with rice powder. And that is meant for birds to peck at and ants to come and eat a little bit, so that, you're doing your bit to feed some other creature on this earth.
In Liberia, there's a famous saying that says, if you haven't eaten rice today, then you haven't eaten at all. But Maya Zango tells me, don't get caught eating a banana in your rice attic.
The Bassa people, because the Bassa people were the first to settle in Liberia, so most of their superstition, other tribes copied it, okay? So the Bassa people believe that you do not go in a rice attic and eat bananas. When you eat banana in a rice attic, whenever you are about to plant the rice, there will always be a rainfall and you won't be able to plant because you ate banana in a rice attic.
And do you believe that?
Oh yeah, the Bassa people say it works. They told all the people, they tell you the same thing. When you go to the farms, they tell you, don't go in the attic and eat banana. Oh. Come down and eat the banana. Don't eat it in the rice attic. Yes. So it's their belief.
But Tasha Marks says rice is also connected to bringing about abundance and life too.
Well, I think a very nice one is probably throwing rice at a wedding. It is a superstitious ritual that goes back to ancient Rome. And it is about when rice was really a symbol of fertility and wealth. So tossing it on a couple during their big day was a way to wish them for healthy crops and financial stability and lots of children. So this act of sort of that we just think is pretty actually is a superstitious or imbuing that couple with love and luck. Superstitions around weddings and love are absolutely rife. I mean, if you look at the cutting of the cake and the honeymoon, so the reason we call it a honeymoon is because it was the month after the wedding, the honeymoon, where the couple would, or the attendees would traditionally drink mead, which is a drink made from honey. So this was meant to be the sweetest month after marriage. And we still use that language, this language of sweet, to describe love. We have our sweethearts, our sweeties, we still go on honeymoons and all those things. I mean, things like gingerbread as well. You're meant to sort of fashion a little icon of your lover to make them fall in love with you. That is where we get the shape of gingerbread from, apparently, one of the reasons. In fact, if we get into the world of aphrodisiacs and how that crosses over to superstition, there is a whole world of interpretation out there when it comes to foodstuffs. Anything that looks remotely phallic or sexual would be an aphrodisiac. So we're into this whole world of food being used to represent other things.
Like what? Can you give us an example?
So, I mean, things like carrots were meant to be an aphrodisiac. We had vanilla. So the word vanilla comes from the Latin for sheath. It's meant to look like a lady's parts, though that's reaching, I feel. Strawberries, pears, anything that you could cut open to have this sort of feminine interior, they all count too. So, yeah, it depends how dirty your mind is, but you can really make anything to an aphrodisiac if you think about it.
And were they more centred around the female or the male? So you talk about phallic objects, yes. Carrot, but then fruit to depict the lady's parts.
Yes.
Is it generally either or is there one particular gender that seems
No, it's pretty equal opportunities for fruits. I feel like both are represented.
You're listening to The Food Chain from the BBC World Service with me, Tamsin Ford, where I'm exploring food's mystical powers. Why is it that so many superstitions exist around what we eat? Few of us can say there isn't one superstition, ritual or habit that we have when it comes to food. But the big question is, why do we do this? Tasha Marks again.
Well, I think food is part of our everyday experience. So it's familiar and it's fundamental to us existing. It can give us a sense of sort of home and belonging, and it can also mark difference and change. And so because of that, food is the sort of perfect vehicle to have these superstitions. It's so linked to our identity and our being that we've evolved a very complex relationship with it. That could be indifference to adulation or obsession or abhorrence for the same things for different people. So I feel like superstitions and rituals naturally evolve from these relationships, and they're individual to us all, but they're sort of all linked together at the same time.
Have we always done this?
Absolutely. I mean, from, honey left in the tombs of the Egyptian pharaohs to drinking tea out of your favourite mug at home, food rituals and superstitions are really part of what it means to be human. Belief in magic in some way is as old as mankind, and people have always believed you could use magic to improve your crop or heal an illness. And at its core, magic and superstition is about trying to explain the unknown. So a lot of those things about luck and health and pushing away the evil eye are really about our urge to understand the world. It's about controlling the uncontrollable. And if we look at sort of early modern Europe, things like science and superstition and religion and medicine and alchemy and witchcraft and the sublime, these things are all mixed up together. So these are everyday wants and hopes and desires, but with much more grand themes in mind.
So it's about trying to exert some sort of control in our lives where there isn't any, essentially.
Absolutely. Well, I think, even without a practical explanation, there's a lot to be said for the placebo effect and for believing that these things would work. And, if anyone has a ritual about, eating something in particular before an exam, or just the way in which they start their day or finish it, or any of these things. We all do it in, every year, probably on our birthdays, when we blow out the birthday candles and make a wish. That's just a cake any other day, but on that day it turns into something special. So I think belief and the power of believing these things will work is in its way. It's not science, but it's an interesting way of looking at things, the belief that these things, just in doing them, become a self-fulfilling action.
While many superstitions in some parts of the world have been confined to the history books, food historian Jonji Rajgopalan says they're very much alive in India.
I think we Indians are able to compartmentalize our lives very well. So we do the most ritualistic, the most bizarre, the most traditional things which we've been doing it for thousands of years. And then we do the most modern thing, in the next 1 minute. And we don't think that there's something wrong with the whole thing,
So what's the difference then between these superstitious rituals around food and habit?
There's a very thin line. We really do a lot of things without even realizing it. And a lot of us oppose it. Like growing up, I know that some of the women in my family were not allowed to touch pickles and oils when they were having their periods. Because apparently the body generates some heat or something like that, which sounded completely ridiculous to me. So I, being, the rebel that I was like, no, there's nothing like that I'm going to do. I'm going to touch every pickle bottle in the kitchen. So I guess it takes some effort to move beyond blind superstition and, break a few of those norms, because it's just the way we do things, it's just become a part of our life.
And do you have any idea of when these first began? Are we talking hundreds of years?
Yeah, I'm actually talking thousands of years. Yeah, because yogurt, sesame seed, rice at weddings, they're all associated with ceremonial things which have been mentioned in the Vedas, which, we believe to have been written finally, because a lot of our Hindu traditions are oral history. they've been passed down verbally, they've not been written anytime. And even when it was written down, it probably was, 1500 BC, BCE. So we're talking about thousands of years ago.
While rituals are ingrained in Indian culture, in Liberia and much of West Africa, journalist Meir Zango says superstitions are closely linked to witchcraft.
You're talking about people in a village, Tamerson Ford, and you are talking about witchcraft? Of course! It is highly believed in a village. Wow! It's practiced in Liberia. All of the counties got witchcraft. All. It's very common.
So are these superstitions around different foods, are they very closely connected to witchcraft?
Yeah, maybe some of it connected to witchcraft, I guess, because why would a pumpkin break down a car when it's not cut? So it's somehow connected to witchcraft. I believe it. It's something that they have proven over the years. And they feel that it works. Whatever you believe works, it works. And the forefathers told them, we did this before and it happened. So they start to tell their children. We listen to our old people. Whatever they tell us is what we listen to. There are many stories that came to us orally, oral history.
Why do you think people follow them?
Before they brought about Christianity, before they brought about Islam, there was something that our forefathers followed. They worshiped something, okay? So they have that belief. Our people feel it's part of their culture. They feel it's part of their culture and tradition. They feel it's part of what defines them. So they keep on to it. They hold on to it. They hold on to these things. They say it's what defines them as a people. So you cannot take it away from our people. No way. You can't.
But what if you do take away these superstitions or rituals? What would we lose?
Some of the traditions give you a little bit of a lesson. Like on every New Year, and not the 1st January, not the Gregorian calendar New Year, but the Hindu calendar New Year, we would always be given it's a kind of a chutney, which is made of all the 5 tastes. So you have sour, you have sweet, you have something bitter in it, and your mom would always give it to you saying that this is what the rest of the year is going to be. You'll have happiness, you'll have